Last week was too easy. We talked about celebration, and it made too much sense, right? Everybody's like, yeah, of course, we should be happy. We should be joyful. We should be celebrating when we come to worship. Yeah, that's easy. Fair enough, Will. But still, we're like, it's not really big news. But this week, we're not talking about celebrating in worship. We're talking about complaining. Oh, now there's a reason to celebrate, right? There's a reason to get excited. That's something we can get behind. We can complain in church. Are you serious, Pastor? Complaining here? Yes. That I know how to do. Is it all right to complain in church? Seems kind of odd to complain in church. It seems kind of disrespectful, impious, maybe even blasphemous, like we don't trust God if we complain in church. Can we faithfully complain? Is there such a thing as faithful complaining? Can we talk about that? Faithful complaining? And is it part of our worship? Does it have a place here? Can we complain here in this space? Now, I want to be clear that we're on the same page and we're not getting our wires crossed here. When I'm talking about complaining, I'm not talking about this kind of human-to-human complaining, the kind of complaining you might give towards your boss. I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about complaining as a spiritual practice, as something really between you and God or the church and God, the people of God with God. This is a spiritual thing I'm talking about, and I don't want us to get confused here about what complaining might mean. We have this wonderful tradition we do as Christians of complaining. We are complaining people. And today, Bill, thank you for reading so much today, Bill. Maybe some of y'all want to complain about how long the readings were. Save it for after the service. But we have this wonderful tradition of complaining, and the Bible doesn't hide from it. The Bible's full of story after story of God's people complaining. The Psalms themselves, if you were to go by and classify the Psalms by genre, most of the Psalms are complaints. They're complaints, and we're part of that. So today we have 3 wonderful case studies. Imagine, if you will, that we have God's complaint box, your Bible here, and that we're going to pick 3 case studies right out of here and find out what it might mean for us as God's people to faithfully complain. So here we go. Case 1, the Israelites in the desert. Last week we talked about the Israelites celebrating their freedom from bondage, but now, oh, how quick things have turned. They're wandering around in the desert aimless, and they are complaining. Why? No food. Legitimate complaint. Their basic needs aren't being met. And so they complain about it. And Moses does the classic middle management move where he takes on the complaint and says, you need to direct this to a higher power. Right? Your complaining is really for God, not to me. And so the people do. The people cry out. They complain. They complain because their basic needs are not being met. And what does God do? God hears the complaint. He answers the complaint, and he provides for the Israelites in the desert. Okay, fair enough. That's case 1. Case 2. Psalm 142. Here we have a situation where an individual is suffering. He is being persecuted, oppressed. He is left all alone with no help, no friends, and possibly even in prison. And this person is crying out to God because they are at their moment of deepest despair. The complaint here, friends, is not about really basic needs, but about safety, about security. This person is vulnerable. The biblical tradition said that this psalm is related to an event in the life of David when David was on the run from King Saul, and he went to a cave and he sought shelter there, and he was abandoned and alone, isolated at his darkest moment, complaining about safety and security. And what does God do? How does God answer this complaint? Do we know? No, we don't. It's unknown. The psalm leaves us with no answer. Okay, let's leave that here. One last case. Take it out of the box. Last one, Matthew chapter 20, workers in the vineyard. In this story, we've got an owner of a great vineyard who is hiring workers at different points throughout the day. And some workers are working all the day, and some are only working half the day, and then you got some that are even working just 1 hour. And when it comes time to pay the workers for their work, what happens? They all get the same amount. So the ones that have been working the longest, they complained. They grumble, it says, which is a word that's very similar to the word that the Israelites used back in Exodus. They're grumbling, complaining, and they go to the owner. And what are they complaining about? It's not about basic needs. It's not about safety or security. Here they're complaining about justice, about what's right, what's fair. And what does God say? God takes this complaint and he says, he basically denies their complaint. You're not getting any more. And God offers an explanation for why you're not getting any more. So here we go. We have 3 different cases. We've got a time where God responds, answers the complaint, a time when we don't know, and a time when God just flat out says no. So if we were to analyze all these different complaints and try to figure out what it means to might faithfully complain, we might be going down the wrong path if we start looking for what types of things we should be complaining about. It has nothing to do with what you're supposed to complain about. That's going down the wrong path, friends. It has everything to do with that we are simply called to complain, period. Don't get wrapped up in, well, am I justified in complaining about this? Am I justified in complaining about that? No. Actually, the invitation is just to complain, period. Why? Why? Why does God invite our complaints? 3 reasons. Number 1, God invites our complaints because God longs to be close to you and I. That complaining is a way of forming a closer relationship. It says in that passage in Exodus chapter 16 that when the Israelites complain, Moses says to them to draw near to God. Bring your complaints. And lo and behold, it says in the text that God does in fact draw near, and the people become closer to God through their complaining. That when God's people cry out, the Lord answers, comes close. I'm a young father, right? And I took care of my son for many years, and I read a lot about how to take care of babies. God, I didn't know the first thing about it. And there's something about when a baby cries out, when they're from a very young age, that when a baby calls out, they need to know that that answer is coming from the parents. It's an essential part of development. That when a baby cries, there needs to be an answer so they can have some trust in their parent. Same as God. When the cry comes out, will God come close? What's that relationship like? So we complain because it's a way of bringing us into relationship. But we also complain because when we complain, we learn something about God. The psalmist, when the psalmist complains and the psalmist says that there is no one here with me, all of a sudden the psalmist has an epiphany where all of a sudden he says there's no one except God. I've got no refuge, but God, you are my refuge. That by complaining, by all of a sudden going down to the lowest point, there the psalmist finds God and is able to find something new, something true. The only thing you and I, friends, have to stand on, that God is there. So through our complaining, we can get knowledge of God, relationship, knowledge. And the last one, through our complaining, we can release our negativity. Release our negativity. Hear me on this one. When the workers who feel that they've been treated unjustly go to their owner, they let out their complaint. They release all that negativity upon the owner, and they don't take that and put it on the workers that just worked 1 hour or even a half a day. They're able to take all that negative energy and they release it out onto the owner. And the owner says something funny. He says something funny to the grumbling workers. He says, take what belongs to you and go. Friends, if you have something to complain about this morning, this week, if you have something to complain about maybe for your whole life, maybe the faithful thing to do is to take it to the one who can handle it, the one who's big enough to take on your complaint, and not allow that complaint to sit within you and then being brought forth out of others, onto others. Not to misdirect it, but to take that complaint straight to a God that's big enough to handle it, so that you can leave behind all that negativity and you can go out and serve. You can take what belongs to you, which isn't that negative energy, which isn't that self-righteousness, which isn't that anger. You can leave that with God and you can go out and you can serve. We complain for relationship. We complain so that we can serve. We complain so that we can know God. But how? How to faithfully complain? Let me show you. Sam's going to help me with something. We can bring it up on the screen. How to faithfully complain. This is based on Psalm 142. All of you are going to be taking your notes. How to faithfully complain. The first thing we want to do is we want to address God. We call on God. We cry out to God. Address God. The second thing is make your complaint. Don't worry about what it is. Don't judge yourself. Just make it. Make your complaint. The third thing is to name God. Name God's character. Name God's qualities. Name God's attributes. Fourth thing, ask. Ooh, this is a tough one. Some of us don't like asking. Address God, complain, name God, ask God for something. And last, number 5, give thanks. If by the end of your complaint, you're at a point where you're asking and then you're giving thanks, what all of a sudden is that you're complaining, a complaint that was without trust, it transforms all of a sudden into something different. It goes from complaining to lamenting. And lamenting is the faithful way in which God's people throughout the ages have brought their complaints to God. And they found that complaining, which is something that you do when you don't trust someone, transforms into lamenting. And lament is when you can take your grievance and you put it before God and you say, God, here's my complaint, here's my problem, here's my trouble, but I trust you. And watch what God does. Watch what God does to your heart. Friends, it's my prayer that in this church that we can develop the ability, the trust in each other to complain, to lament faithfully. And watch what God will do. Amen.